back in Welsh, and welcome for those who have just joined. So this is the second segment today, our member presentations. So we know our network benefits from learning from one another and real working examples of befriending operations. Our first presentation is on a very popular discussion topic in our network, volunteer recruitment. And since I'm based in Wales, it's a pleasure to hand over to Georgia Parker, the scheme manager at Age Connect, Cardiff and the Vale, who's going to talk about an innovative approach to volunteer recruitment and befriending matches. So Georgia, over to you. Thank you so much.
For having me today, and also thank you to Victoria for inviting me along to chat. So I'm Georgia, as Matt said, and I work for Age Connect, Cardiff and the Vale. So my role is to find volunteers to help support older people who are experiencing social isolation and loneliness. And when I match volunteers and recruit them, rather than what tends to be the normal process of the volunteer manager picking which client they think would go with which volunteer, our volunteers actually have the option to choose their own clients. And after attending a few different training sessions with Befriending networks, we sort of found out this was quite different to how other organisations might do it. So today I will be covering how our matching process works, what we find are the benefits of this, but also addressing some of the potential barriers and how we try to overcome this. So in terms of the matching process, when a client has been referred to us, so this might come through a doctor's referral, maybe a social worker, I will call up the client and I will then go and carry out a home visit to them. So during this visit, I will make sure that I think our service is the right fit for them in general and that they meet our criteria. And make sure that they actually are experiencing social isolation, and if not, I sort of help them work out other services that might be more beneficial for them. But the main part of this process is asking, what are their hobbies, their interests, maybe what their past careers were, what they did as a job, just so I can get a real good feel for how, what their personality is like and what their interests are. And therefore, what kind of things they would get out of, wanting to chat to a volunteer with. So when I've left the visit and I've made notes about, all these different areas of the person's personality and about their life, I write up what we call a mission description, and then I upload this to Volunteero. So Volunteero is an app that we use mainly to engage with our volunteers. So when they first start their recruitment, this is where they can go to book onto an induction. But when they've then gone through the full recruitment process, this is where they can then view all of the different clients that are available for them to visit and befriend. So they can then see all of the different mission descriptions that are written, and they can go in and check, what missions are new, what they enjoy, and then there's just like a little blurb about which volunteers find really useful. So, and Volunteero is also where our volunteers are able to write reports about how their befriending journey is going, which is really useful and it's very easy for them. So when they've looked through the app and they've assigned themselves to a mission, a match meeting is then arranged so they can come with me to meet the client who I will have already met before. And I really do find that when there's that common ground already, it does break the ice on that initial meeting, which is great to see. So a perfect example of when this went well was when I visited a client and she was telling me all about how she used to love decorating cakes, and she was showing me all of the things she'd done using icing and all the designs she'd made. And, you know, I could tell this was something she was really passionate about. So I made sure to mention that in the mission description. And then coincidentally, one of the volunteers who I had just recruited also really enjoyed cake decorating and, you know, making things with icing, which, even though I'd already met her at her induction, you know, it wasn't necessarily something she thought necessary to bring up. It just never came up in conversation. But by her going through and reading the mission description, she then instantly knew that was something they shared in common. And when we first went to meet the client together, that was something they instantly spoke about. And, you know, she was then showing the volunteer the design she'd made, like she showed me. So yeah, it was a really good way to sort of break the ice. And I guess that just got the rapport up and running really soon into them meeting, which was great to see. So here is just a little example of what the volunteer can see on their end when they open up the app. So they can see the client's first name and then the first initial. And then when they've clicked into the different missions there, it will come up with the mission description. And another great thing is, as you can see there, it says 18 miles away. So based off their location, they can see how far away the client actually lives from them, which, you know, is great because it helps a volunteer know how easy it will be to get there, especially if maybe they don't drive and they will need to walk to the client's home. And it does also say there how long the client has been on the system for. So sometimes, you know, people might stay on the system for a bit longer if maybe they have a pet in the home or they smoke in their home. So sometimes I go back in after maybe, say, 6 months, and I sort of think, like, give it a rethink how I could maybe reword it to make it more engaging. And then I re-upload it so they come up as a new client then. And it might help new volunteers to see theirs first. So this is just an example of the kind of information I share in the mission description. So I highlight any risk factors. So if there's pets, smoking, anything like that. So that in itself sort of takes away any sort of maybe guilty feeling of them to, if I've, you know, said, oh, you know, this person really needs a befriender, but there's this risk factor. Maybe people might feel a bit embarrassed to turn them down from that. But, you know, if they are looking at the app, it's just something they can decide without any sort of guilt around it to say, actually, I don't think that's a client I would feel comfortable visiting. I will also include some information about this situation. So maybe chat about or, you know, write about why they might be lonely. So perhaps their partner has sadly passed away, or maybe they have some children, but they live far away. So it just gives them a bit of context, volunteer. And then there's also the option on Volunteero to title the mission with what type of befriending exactly they're looking for. So whether it's telephone befriending, a home visit, or to go out and about, so they know, you know, if that's what they're looking to help with. And then, like mentioned before, I also discuss their interests and hobbies and past jobs. So here is a little example of what I might write in a mission description. So meet Mrs. W, a delightful and talkative lady who was eager to have some friendly company. After the passing of her husband a few years ago, Mrs. W has found herself without close companionship, as her nieces and nephews live far away. Despite this, she remains a vibrant and engaging person, having been a magistrate as well as a physiotherapist during her career. Mrs. W enjoys staying informed with the latest news and loves watching television. So that just gives sort of a really good summary, and it makes it seem really appealing to the volunteer, and it sort of helps them to know what conversations they might end up having when they meet. And also, you know, in these descriptions, I make sure to change their name so the client isn't actually called Mrs. W, just to help with the confidentiality side of things. So here are a few of the benefits that we have found since making it this way round, you know, with the volunteer choosing their client. So it gives them a greater sense of autonomy and empowerment. So it really gives volunteers that control of their own experience, and in turn this can increase satisfaction and commitment. And it just means that, you know, maybe they feel they can take more responsibility of it themselves rather than sort of, you know, it just gives them that flexibility to do you know, volunteer however they see fit, and it fits into their lives as best as possible. So it also saves time. So my manager explained that before we had the Volunteero app and we had this system, they would have to call volunteers, existing ones, whenever they had new clients through, and it did take a lot of time to chase volunteers over the phone. So this way, volunteers can come forward in their own time and at their own leisure. So, you know, this could reduce the feeling of a volunteer feeling like they're being chased if, you know, maybe they're not willing to take a new client on at that time. So it does just give them that flexibility. It also allows for a better personal fit. So, you know, if we might not exactly know a volunteer and their personality that well when we first meet them, if we've only met them for an induction, or sometimes as there's another volunteer recruitment officer in Age Connects, I may not have actually spent much time with the volunteer at all myself during their recruitment. So for them to be able to select themselves who they think they might gel quite well with, you know, this can be really beneficial, and hopefully it can lead to more natural and meaningful connections as well. Also, another benefit is that the nature of the Volunteero app, where it's you have notifications set up, this can be really beneficial, and it's, you know, real time. So we have a lot of ad hoc volunteering opportunities as well as long-term befriending ones. So it could be a case of I put on there's a one-off opportunity for a volunteer to transport someone to their COVID vaccination, for example. And then it gives that transfer. If I normally think a volunteer works full time, but for some reason that week they're off, by them just seeing that notification, they can just instantly click. And, you know, I might not have even thought to have got in contact with them, but it does help, and this makes it sort of malleable to changing circumstances. And in addition, if their circumstances have changed and they really enjoy befriending and they're now in a position they could take on a second client, then they also have the ability to do that without, you know, having to get in touch with me, or for me to keep you know, asking them what their circumstances are. Could you take on someone new? So yeah, in that sense, it's really great. And all of these things combined sort of lead to an increased motivation and engagement. So when volunteers feel that personal connection or interest in a client, they're more likely to stay engaged and committed over time. So for example, a client was looking for a shopping volunteer. And when I went there, it was apparent he was really interested in Egyptian history, which, you know, is maybe quite niche, but he had loads of things in his home, like books. And actually, by me mentioning that, a shopping volunteer came forward, and, you know, you can only imagine then the sorts of conversations they were having, and the volunteer can then learn a lot, and it you know, is then really beneficial for them, and hopefully as much as the client gets you know, something great out of the support they get off the volunteer can also benefit too. So this can then lead to reduced dropout rates. You know, maybe if the volunteer feels more aligned with their client, they're less likely to disengage or leave the programme prematurely. And most of the time, our volunteers stay with the client right up until maybe they go into a care home or sadly pass away, and they really do form such a strong bond with them. So there are a couple of barriers which we encounter. So there is an issue that sometimes people might be on the waiting list longer. Maybe if a particular client doesn't have many particular interests, or, you know, maybe there's those risk factors that the volunteer doesn't want to maybe go into their home. So to tackle this, sometimes we put out social media posts with the specific mission description, again, either on our social media page itself, or I will sometimes post it into different groups, like for areas in particular. I'll show you an example of that in a moment. And then also it does require using Volunteero. So as you can imagine, it might be a case of a volunteer might not really like using technology or their phone that much. However, in my experience, people do actually tend to be completely fine with searching, because it really is quite simple. The only time people sometimes email me instead is when it comes to writing a report, but normally they find it quite easy to assign themselves to a mission. So here is a perfect example of a social media post that we might use. Obviously, we keep out any information that could identify them, but in the past, this has worked really well, where I've had someone who hadn't even considered volunteering before. She saw a Facebook post where a client had been all over the world traveling, and she wanted to go traveling herself. So she actually then came forward to volunteer for her and have those chats. And then it sort of makes it more personal, and it gives people an idea of exactly what they might gain and what conversations they might have whilst volunteering. And then it can, you know, increase those numbers of volunteers that we have through, which, as I'm sure you all know, is always really beneficial. So obviously you might be thinking, you know, how do we ensure confidentiality? So I make sure I always leave out specific information. So I might say what job they used to do, but I would never say, you know, the organisation they used to work for or what area it was in. And their full name and address is not disclosed until the volunteer is assigned to the mission. So it's not until I've accepted it from my end, and, you know, they actually need to know the client's address and phone number to be able to visit them. Yeah, until then they won't know that information. And then also no photos are used at all. So I wouldn't, you know, take a photo of the client and upload it to Facebook or something, or onto Volunteero. So yeah, their identity is kept completely out of the equation. So to obtain data consent, when I visit the client, I make it clear instantly why I'm asking them about their interests and their hobbies, and I let them know, you know, I'll go away and I'll write up a bit of a blurb about you, and then this just means when a volunteer comes forward who might also have an interest for gardening, they can then, you know, come forward and they will be your volunteer and your match. And that makes them feel reassured then too, because it feels more like they'll have someone to bond with who they're on a similar level with, rather than just, you know, that thing of, oh, there's a complete stranger coming to visit and what will we talk about? It gives them that clarity as well. So yeah, I gain that verbal consent and I make a note of it. So that brings me to the end of my presentation today, and here are my contact details, which I'm sure will be in the delegate pack, as well as the presentation. So thank you very much for listening today.
Hello there, Sonia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Georgia. That was a really great presentation and a really good example of how to approach recruitment and matching. Getting the Befriend and Match started on the right note is such an important task, and it's important to ensure that there's positive endings as well involved. Just a quick note before we go into the next presentation, I can see there was lots of questions in the chat. So just a reminder that all of the questions will be answered in our delegate pack. So do keep checking in throughout the day on there, and we'll make sure we get to those questions there, and the presentations will also sit there too. So now we'll hand over to our second presentation with Kirsten and Jan from Families First St Andrews. Over to you.
Hi there, everyone. Good morning. Wow, there are so many of you. Thanks, Georgia. That was a great presentation. Why did you have to be so good? Then we've got to follow that. Thanks to Befriending Networks as well for the chance to showcase some of the work that we do around creating positive endings. Do you like our title? We thought we'd bring a bit of Shakespeare into our presentation today. All's well that ends well. So I'm Jan, the Befriending Coordinator, and this is Kirsten, who's the Volunteer Coordinator from Families First in St Andrews, Fife. We're a wee small local charity, and we work with children and families who offer a range of supports in North East Fife. One of the core services we have is one-to-one befriending. And today we're going to talk about the importance of managing endings in befriending matches and our approach to making them positive and successful. So this is where we are. We're very lucky to be located right in the centre of a small university town. It's really important to us, our link with St Andrews University. They're a good source of volunteers for us. Some of them are psychology students, not all of them, but a vast majority are, who are very keen to underpin their learning with some hands-on practical experience, and so they do that through volunteering with us. We've got a really good relationship with the uni, which we have fostered well over the years. We attend recruitment fairs, freshers fairs, charities fairs, and we've got links to some of the various university clubs and groups. Although not all of our volunteers are students, a vast majority are. So while there are many benefits to having a steady supply of young, educated and willing volunteers, the downside of that is that we only have these volunteers for a very limited time, and endings are therefore inevitable. So we're planning for endings right at the very beginning of our training. So our next slide here is a lovely little photograph of one of our matches, a volunteer with a young person. They're working alongside each other. And I'll hark back to what Katie was saying about working alongside people, and that's what we try to do at Families First, is work alongside, hand in hand with people. So the children and families referred to us come from quite a diverse range of backgrounds. Many of them have already experienced sudden and painful losses in their lives, and we're always mindful of this and the very person-centred approach that we use. Some of our children have had parents and carers who have passed away or left suddenly. Some of them had social workers or foster placements that have changed without warning. or support services that are being cut. A lot of support services are being cut these days or withdrawn. Each of these experiences can leave emotional scars with children. They can have feelings of being let down, they can be confused, not being good enough, or just not being worthy of somebody's time and effort. We know that this can impact children's attachment styles and their ability to process loss and change. It's hard to have the resilience you need to manage change when you're so young and have maybe experienced so many ACEs in your life. We also know that unless support is put in place, this can go on to impact young people right into their adulthood. We don't want that. So while we spend a lot of time training and supporting our volunteers to build valuable, trusted relationships with the children they're matched with, we're already talking about planning the time when the relationship will come to an end, because we know that it will. Saying goodbye to someone you care about can be painful, but most of us already have the emotional resilience we need and the ability to cope. However, some of our children don't have this, and unplanned, unexplained endings can reinforce feelings of abandonment, rejection, sometimes mistrust. The good news is, though, that through careful planning and training, we have the power to make a positive difference. I'm going to hand you over to Kirsten to tell you more about that.
Cool. Thank you, Jan. So, with that as our background to Families First and the importance of positive endings here, this is a little roadmap of the volunteer journey and the different stops where we mention positive endings to our volunteers outside of the actual session, which is the positive ending. So the 4 stops on the road are the initial all-day training, right when an individual is starting out their time with us, any support and supervision meetings that the volunteer has with me as the volunteer coordinator, and then a mid-year training workshop or individual chat to plan the ending more specifically, which I'll go into more detail on later. And then right at the end of their time with us, after the session, which was their last session or close to it, we would also have an exit interview just to chat through things. So I'm going to go through each of these stages now. And to start right at the beginning, when somebody wants to volunteer with us, you're at our all-day training, you're filling out your application forms, and we are actually already talking about the ending. As Jan mentioned, quite a lot of our volunteers are students. So we're asking them when their course ends, and we're checking in with them about that. So one of our modules during the all-day training spotlights positive endings. It may seem like a bit of overkill maybe to talk about it at this point, and maybe to the volunteers it seems like that because they might not even be thinking about leaving yet. And for anybody that is a local real adult non-student, they really might not be thinking about leaving at all. It is also maybe interesting to note for anybody here that has various programs or services involved in their organization. We do mention positive endings to all of our volunteers that are relationally involved with service users. So outside of Befriending, that might be in youth group. So that might be something that you guys also want to take from Befriending to other volunteer roles. At this training, we explain a little bit about positive endings and why they matter. So it's similar to what Jan has already done, explaining adverse childhood experiences and additional support needs and how that might impact a child's ability to cope with a loss or change. We also will briefly outline psychological theories of attachment and grief and loss. And we start with the volunteers' own experiences of loss and change to help them understand why this might be a really positive or a really negative experience for a child. We also, as we will do later in this presentation, describe and show examples of positive endings so that the volunteer can see what this might actually look like. Here's just one slide that we use at our all-day training. So these are just tactics or general strategies that we like to mention for planning and then for having a positive ending with their young person. So we talk a lot about discussing this with the service user and with staff, especially around the volunteer's own feelings. We talk about being aware of what everybody might be going through and being honest about what is happening. We really focus on creating a happy memory in that last session so that we're celebrating the time that the volunteer and the child have had together. And then things like memory crafts may be helpful transitional objects for creating that positive ending. And then the next stop on the road, which volunteers might come back to multiple times, go round the roundabout, if we're going to carry on the analogy, is their support and supervision meetings. So we aim to do these every 6 months or every year. And this is just a really quick check-in. How are you feeling now to be in 3rd year? Only 1 year to go. We're in St Andrews, so 4-year programs up here. Or maybe it's just a time to check in with a volunteer and see if there's anything that may create the need for a positive ending before the planned ending. So that might be something that's helpful for local people as well. So it might be that the service user is now ready to move on to a different program. It may be that the volunteer is struggling with their availability due to family circumstances or their university schedule. And we want to have that check-in at support and supervision to make sure that we can create a positive ending and that it doesn't just happen out of nowhere for anyone. So that's a helpful stop. And then we get to the mid-year training or individual chat. So when we're getting closer to the end of a volunteer's experience and a volunteer's time with us, we want to recall the importance of positive endings, and we want to plan what the positive ending with their service user might look like. So at the initial all-day training, the volunteer hasn't met the child yet. So they're unable to really think through this specifically. But at this point, when they're just getting ready to leave, we can have that more in-depth discussion. And because we have quite a number of volunteers that leave, we are looking to do this through like a mid-year training workshop, just to be a bit time efficient. But we've done this previously through individual chats. So as I mentioned, this is a chance for the volunteer to think about the child's reaction to previous losses that they've had. They may have now talked about this with the child, or they may have seen that the child process a difficulty. The volunteer is also invited to concretely plan with dates, with memories that they might want to reflect back on. So I'll show you the worksheet that we use. So hopefully you can see that these questions kind of relate to the slide that I showed from all day training about discussing this and about celebrating. So I'll read them out or summarize them. The first question asks the volunteer to anticipate how the service user will react to the news that the befriending match is ending and why they think they will react this way. And then the second question asks the volunteer to reflect on their own feelings and their own reaction to the match ending. The third question asks the volunteer to think about their own favorite memory and the service user's favorite memory of their time together. Might be completely different, might be exactly the same, you never really know. And then the volunteer is invited to reflect on the impact that they are making in the child's life and any skills or attributes that they want to celebrate as the match ends. So these questions are hopefully for the volunteer just to think through, and then they can lead to planning the ending. So for example, the favorite memories that they've had with the child may lead them on to think about creating a memory book or a storybook, which is a transitional object. So that's at the first section there. So that might be, they want photos of these favorite memories that they've had together that they've been reflecting on because they've just had so many happy times. Or maybe when thinking through how the service user will react and their own feelings, that relates to the strategies that they want to use to help this service user manage the positive ending. It's helpful to have these listed out so that the volunteer can think through them all, even though it may not occur to them that they should, for example, share their own feelings. They may not anticipate that, or they may not anticipate that they really need to reassure the child that they're not to blame. But just having them listed in this worksheet can help bring those back to their mind from the all-day training that they had right at the start of their volunteering time with us. So then the last section on the little worksheet is the timeline. So it is listed here as the 6th last session, but not every child needs 6 sessions to plan their positive ending, because for us that's fortnightly sessions, so that's actually quite a long time. However, we do just want the volunteer to actually think through, when should I first have this conversation, potentially with staff there, or when should I go back to our favorite place together, and then when should I create the memory book, and maybe put down dates so that these are not sessions that are going to fall out of their calendar. Yeah, that is the worksheet. And then hopefully they've already had their session. They've had those celebrations of the service user's skills and qualities. And then basically, I just really love to chat, as we can tell. This whole thing is just me talking to people. But the exit interview is a bit of a formal term. It's really just a chance for the volunteer to fully verbalise what have been the really wonderful things about volunteering and maybe what have been the challenges. We also ask the volunteer if we can stay in contact with them after their time volunteering, potentially to share this with the service user if it is appropriate and there is consent. And then vice versa, we may share information with the volunteer about the service user, which may just look like the service user is now in youth group and they're doing really well at making friends there. They're having a wonderful time. So that's a way to continue the transition or positive ending. So this is the roadmap that we showed at the start. And I guess this section is all to say that positive endings are not just about the end. And the work to get to that positive ending is not, it doesn't happen right at that third spot, for example. It happens throughout the volunteer's time with us as a team effort from the volunteer and from staff, and also from the child, I guess. Our emphasis on this element of volunteering isn't sprung on the volunteer, and we found that speaking about it just at the start or just at the end doesn't work, because on one hand, they don't know the child, and they might forget, especially if it's a long-term match, they might forget about the importance of a positive ending and how to do that. And we also don't want to do it too late. So we like to do it throughout, and hopefully that will help lead to positive endings.
So thank you, Kirsten. So here you can see one of the fantastic memory books that was made by, well, we've got the names on it already, Leanne and Jay. They gave us permission. They planned the positive ending very well and really enjoyed their last time together. So anyway, now we've done all that. We've completed the training. We've prepared the volunteer and the child. We've counted down to the final day. Might have taken us quite a long time. We've planned the ending, bought the cake, worked hard on making this fantastic memory book, and then the child doesn't show up for the final session, or the volunteer is ill, or there's a storm, or something gets in the way, something has to get cancelled. Things just don't always go to plan, we find. I'm sure you all find the same as me. But we're nothing if not flexible in our approach, and we try to be prepared for changes. What we say is that we'll plan for the worst and hope for the best. It's always a good motto in life. We acknowledge and empathise with children's and volunteers' disappointments, and we support them to make new plans, like to involve people in the plans that we make. It's just one more step towards helping young people understand that, as in life, endings are just as important as beginnings. So here we see a nice friendship that was formed during our befriending matches. We've got lots of examples of positive endings. This is just a few. This is our lovely volunteer, Kay, with Elle. They were together for 2 years, so it's got actually a fairly long time for the relationships for our matches, because of the students who leave quite quickly. Their thing was just lots of sitting, enjoying and chatting. Elle had a very niche interest that wouldn't interest very many people. She was delighted to have someone she could just sit and talk to about warrior cats. I don't know if anybody else knows about warrior cats, but having been part of some of these sessions now, I think I know quite a lot. So the volunteer's best memory, she said it was walking to the park and just sitting and chatting to her befriendee for over an hour. And her befriender, she said, became a lot more open over the last 2 years. And she thinks that she just liked somebody to have to listen to her. I think we're all just looking for someone who'll just sit and listen to us sometimes. So the befriender had to work really hard to get her befriendee to agree to go for a walk on their last day, and ice cream was used as an incentive there. Sometimes the volunteer's idea of what will be a great last session doesn't always match with the child, but it very often does through a lot of planning and discussion. So they had a really nice time that day. However, our befriendee, she said, "Girl, I can't believe you made me go for a walk." But she was joking. She had the best sense of humour. So our befriendee's best memory was just sitting, drawing and talking about warrior cats. And she said, "I think I've educated my befriender now on warrior cats, so I think she'll be okay. My work here is done." So here we almost see one of our befrienders hiding in the picture there. our child here had very little consistency in his life, so it was really, really important that he knew from the very beginning that he'd only going to be with his befriender for a year and a half. And Kirsten made sure to do the countdown very well with the volunteer. So his big thing was creating really elaborate and complicated art designs. However, he couldn't quite manage his emotions when things didn't turn out perfectly. So we were constantly managing the expectations, and his befriender was a really, really big help with that. The befriender said that the child he worked with was really creative. He said when we first met, he needed to be shown how to have options to choose from, but now he's much more self-assured and independent, and he designs really amazing, complex projects. We always think there's no way that this can work out, but anyway, they usually do, and they usually do brilliantly as well. He said, I can see my befriendee as a highly successful game designer in the future, and I think it's really nice for children to have someone who'll just believe in them and see the best in them. So this is another photo. This is one of our child's creative designs. It looks horrific, I know. It's a character from Poppy Playtime, which I don't know that any of you know Poppy Playtime, and it is age relatable, but it's horrific. Anyway, it's probably one of the scariest things you'll ever see, but he made it all himself and was super proud. Another of his designs was making a boxy boo, another Poppy Playtime character, and that was to be the finale for their time together. Anyway, it required a jack-in-the-box, and we were forever hopeful of finding one in one of the many charity shops we've got in St Andrews, because the new ones were just too expensive, and we couldn't believe our luck when quite near the end of their time together, they actually found exactly what they were looking for in a charity shop. Happy days, and a very positive ending, especially when it was followed by ice cream. You can see that ice cream features quite heavily in our endings here. Anyway, this pair's best memory, they both agreed on the same thing. It was finding the jack-in-the-box in the charity shop after searching for forever. I don't really know what we would have done if we hadn't found one. We'd probably have blown the budget and bought a bigger one. Don't tell our CEO, I think she's listening.
So then another example here is A and F, who have developed a great connection over 2.5 years in befriending. So when they started out, F, the child, was a wee small boy, and then he's taller than his befriender in this picture here. So they made plans for their last 2 sessions, revisiting favorite activities from their past and then making a memory board. So we asked our volunteers to write session reports after the sessions, which are kind of like diary entries. And I'm just going to read you what A wrote in her 2 last session reports to kind of reflect on the positive ending that they had together. So A says here, this is their second last session. It felt like one of our first sessions today, as we did one of our favorite things, the aquarium. We had a lovely walk and a chat as we went, and as usual, I learned a lot from you. I am so happy I got to see you again before Easter. And then in their last session, this is what A said. Today was a really special session. It was just us in Rose Lane, which was a lovely way to spend our last befriending session together. We did arts and crafts and made a memory board with all our best photos. We played some Mario that we love, and then we went for ice cream in the same place we went 2 years ago. I am so proud of how far we have come together. So you can see here that A has really reflected on her favorite memories and gone and looked for these photos and provided them to her befriendee so that they can create this memory board. They can go, do you remember that time? Oh, do you remember when we were here all that time ago when you were so small? And you can also see that A is reflecting on his personal qualities. She's so proud of him and the way that they have grown together. So it's really nice to hear that from A's own words. And then in a really nice twist of fate, we were expecting this to be a full positive ending with A graduating. And luckily enough, F was moving to a different service. So that all kind of came together at a really nice time. And then at last minute, A decided to stay. She managed to get a job in town. So it moved from a positive ending to a positive transition. And it kind of shows that sometimes those best laid plans need to be switched up. And now A and F have been actually reunited in youth group, which is really lovely. But kind of working from better to be cautious has really worked out in this situation, because if we hadn't have done that positive ending and really focused on that, then it would have been worse if she had actually left, if it had been the other way around, if you understand what I mean. It's also a really good example that positive endings matter when the child is moving on to a different service, and matter in situations where the volunteers aren't just leaving town. So that might be appropriate for some of your services that don't rely so heavily on student volunteers. And then our last example of a positive ending is here with actually our volunteers. So it's also really important to us at Families First that we have positive endings with our volunteers as an organisation, because they have given so much of their time, and we just want to recognise that, as all of these volunteers that we've shown in these slides have actually been students. So they spent 4 years of their life in this town, and they're leaving all of that. And we want them to have a positive ending with us, as well as having a positive ending with their service user. It's often a big moment of change in their life, so we want to mark it in some way. And they get kind of a transitional object from us in this mug, which also has a little note and some photos in it. And some sweets as well, because again, sweet treats always help these positive endings. So we would really encourage you to think about that when volunteers are leaving your service, and it's important to us that we do that for them. Again, to go back to the exit interview, it's important to us that they get the chance to share all about that and kind of get all that out of their heads before they leave, so they don't just walk out the door and we don't just say goodbye to the service. That relationship isn't just ended, it's also their volunteering relationship with us.
So this is us giving you our positive ending. We are finished. Thanks for listening to us. We hope we've given you some ideas to help your service promote positive endings. It's not goodbye forever, of course. We're going to catch up with you all later. If you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to get in touch. This is our details here. Or if you're ever in St Andrews, pop in and say hello, and we'll get you some ice cream.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Georgia, to Jan, and to Kirsten for sharing your inspiring examples of befriending in action. Really appreciate that both presentations were demonstrating with clear examples and sharing recommendations for actioning similar approaches. All the information shared by our three lovely presenters could be amended and applied to different age groups too, which is so helpful when our delegates today are from such a variety.